They told you time heals. That distance makes them miss you, that silence itself would do the work. But you've felt the truth, haven't you? You've vanished before, disappeared from their world like smoke. And still, nothing. No late-night message, no desperate reach, just the same haunting quiet, and the echo of your own doubt. That's because silence by itself is nothing but an empty stage. The real shift begins in what follows, the invisible moves they can't see, the inner transformation they can't control. When your absence stops being a pause and becomes a presence in itself, the story doesn't end. It starts, and it's in that unseen moment, when routine turns to unpredictability, when begging turns to calm indifference, that their mind begins to spiral and their script starts to fall apart. Brother, this isn't about vanishing from their life. It's about rewriting the laws of power without a single word. If that's a language you're ready to speak, then start this journey now. Like and subscribe to Stoic Station so you never miss a lesson in silence, strength, and self-mastery. Now tell me, have you ever gone silent only to realize nothing changed? Drop a 1 if you've been there. Drop a 2 if you're ready to learn the deeper reason why. Because what comes next will change how you see silence forever. And the moment you understand it, you'll never play the same game again. Let's dive in. The truth. Silence alone doesn't break them. Silence is powerful, but only if it has weight behind it. Most men believe disappearing is the final move, the grand strategy that will flip the dynamic in their favor. They imagine their absence will echo louder than any words, shaking her ego and pulling her back. But here's the hard truth. Silence by itself isn't a power move, it's just a pause. And pauses don't change stories, they simply leave space for the old one to keep playing. You know that frustration. You pull back, you vanish, and yet, nothing. There's no panic, no regret, no desperate message. She carries on with her life as if you were never there. It feels like the silence has failed you. But what's really happened is this. Silence without substance is hollow. It isn't a weapon, it's an empty gesture. And empty gestures don't threaten the ego, they feed it. Because every day you stay quiet but secretly hope, every time you check your phone or wonder if she's thinking about you, you're still orbiting her world. She doesn't feel your absence because in truth you never really left. Power isn't born from simply walking away. It's forged in what happens after. It's the discipline you build in the dark, the internal shift from needing her validation to owning your peace. It's the transformation that makes your silence more than space. It makes it gravity, and gravity can't be ignored. Silence isn't the end of the story, brother. It's only the first chapter. The question now is not whether you'll disappear, but whether you'll become someone whose absence rewrites the entire script. And that's where the real story begins. 2. The essence of strategic silence. Real silence isn't about what you stop doing. It's about who you become while doing nothing. Most men treat silence like a show, retreating into quiet while secretly refreshing their phones, replaying memories, and wondering if she still cares. That hidden need leaks through, and she senses it instantly. As long as your silence is fueled by hope, it's not strength, it's desperation in disguise. Stoicism teaches that real power begins within, mastering your thoughts, directing your focus, and reclaiming your energy. When your silence comes from calm indifference rather than anxious waiting, it ceases to be a tactic. It becomes your unshakable presence. 3. The inner shift. When silence becomes a way of life. Silence only becomes powerful when it stops being something you do and starts being who you are. Most men disappear in appearance but remain emotionally anchored to her world. Their minds still replay every conversation. Their feelings still rise and fall based on her imagined reactions. And that's why their silence never lands with weight, because beneath the surface, nothing has truly changed. You may have walked away physically, but if your thoughts still revolve around her, you haven't taken your power back. The hard truth is this: as long as your emotional energy bends in her direction, she will always feel safe. She knows your absence is temporary. She senses that behind the silence is a heart still seeking validation, still waiting for a reason to stop waiting. That's why silence must evolve beyond action. It must become a posture. It's not about ignoring her for a week or deleting her number. It's about reprogramming the center of gravity within you. When you no longer seek, no longer chase, no longer react, you stop orbiting her story and begin writing your own. This is where Stoic silence is born, not in the performance of detachment, but in the embodiment of it. It's the shift from waiting for her to notice you to no longer needing her attention at all. And that's the moment everything changes. Because when your worth no longer depends on her reply, your silence stops feeling like a tactic and starts radiating as presence. She doesn't feel your absence when you walk away. She feels it when she realizes she no longer has power over your peace. And that's when the balance tips. That's when the void you left becomes heavy enough to pull her back in. The real power move isn't silence itself. It's becoming the man who no longer needs to break it. Fourth, turning silence into a fortress. Silence, when done right, isn't passive. It's architecture. Most men treat it like bait. They cast it into the emotional waters, sit back and wait, hoping she'll bite. But hope is not strategy. It's dependence wearing the mask of patience. And dependence is exactly what she's counting on. Because as long as your silence is reactive, it's predictable. And what's predictable never shakes the ground beneath her feet. The truth is, silence becomes powerful only when it stops being a pause and transforms into a position, a deliberate structure that cannot be ignored. Too many men believe the work ends when the phone goes quiet. But silence isn't about what you stop doing. It's about how you start living differently. If your routines remain the same, if you still show up where she expects you, if your presence lingers in the same places online or offline, she will predict your every move. And predictability is her comfort zone. Comfort means control, and control keeps her ego safe. To flip that script, you must become unpredictable. Your silence has to evolve from an act into a fortress, a stronghold so intentional and impenetrable that she can no longer map your moves. That means shifting your patterns. Stop appearing in the places she's used to seeing you. Change your routines so they no longer revolve around her memory. Pull your energy out of the spaces where her ego still feeds on your presence. Eliminate every breadcrumb, no subtle signals, no indirect posts, no emotional leaks. Every trace of the old story must disappear. When you do this, something profound happens. A gap forms, a void she cannot fill with assumptions or control. And that gap begins to gnaw at her mind. She wonders where you are, why you're no longer visible, what's happening in the silence she can't read. That uncertainty is the seed of obsession. It's no longer you chasing validation, it's her chasing clarity. A fortress doesn't chase enemies. It stands tall, silent, immovable, forcing them to come to its gates. And that's exactly what strategic silence does when it's built with discipline and intention. It stops being a waiting room and becomes a domain. And in that domain, power is no longer something you reach for. It's something they must cross the distance to find. V. The tests, when she starts checking for cracks. The first real sign that your silence is working isn't a confession, a tearful message, or a sudden apology. It's a test, and make no mistake, brother, it will come. Because the moment your absence begins to unsettle her, the moment her ego starts to feel the pressure of not being in control, she'll do what human nature always does under uncertainty. She'll probe for weakness. It might be something small, a like on an old photo, a random hey that feels casual, or a story reply that looks innocent. But none of these are genuine attempts to reconnect. They're not signs of love. They're diagnostic checks, ways to measure whether you're still orbiting around her world. This is where most men lose everything they've built. Weeks of discipline, control, and strategic silence can be shattered by one emotional response. They see a breadcrumb and mistake it for a breakthrough. Their heart races, their fingers twitch, and they fire off a reply, often too warm, too eager, too revealing. And in that single moment, the power they spent weeks constructing collapses like a house of cards. Because what that response really tells her is this: you're still here. I still matter. I still control the narrative. Understand this clearly. Every test is about control. It's not about reconnection, curiosity, or even closure. It's about regaining the upper hand. The second you react, she knows the power dynamic hasn't changed. And once that certainty returns, your silence loses its weight. What once felt like a wall becomes a door she knows she can walk through anytime she wants. That's why tests exist, not to pull you closer, but to check if you've truly left. And if you're still reacting, even in small ways, you're not gone. You're just waiting in the shadows. The psychology behind this is simple. When people feel they're losing control, they don't immediately chase. They test. It's safer. It's less vulnerable. And it tells them everything they need to know without risk. Think of it like tapping the walls of a fortress, looking for cracks. That's exactly what those accidental messages and subtle signals are. Taps. And every time you respond emotionally, you confirm that the walls aren't solid. This is why indifference is not just a mindset, it's armor. True indifference doesn't mean hatred or bitterness. It means your emotional state no longer depends on their behavior. If you choose to respond at all, it should be cold, neutral, and unbothered. A reply that offers nothing for their ego to feed on. A simple, "I'm good," or even silence itself, can speak volumes. Because when you refuse to take the bait, when every breadcrumb is met with stillness or disinterest, you're sending a message far louder than any words: "I'm no longer playing your game." And here's where the power dynamic flips in a way she never expected. The less you give, the more her mind starts to spiral. The more she's forced to question what changed. The man who once reacted immediately now doesn't react at all. The person she could always pull back into her orbit suddenly feels unreachable. And what the ego cannot control, it begins to obsess over. But this is the part where discipline is hardest. Late at night, when nostalgia creeps in, when you see that tiny message pop up on your screen, every part of you will want to believe it means something more. This is where Stoic strength is forged. In the unseen battles with your own impulses. Every urge you resist is another brick in the wall of your new reality. Every moment you hold the line is another reminder that you're no longer seeking permission to be valued. If you break here, you go back to the same cycle: push and pull, hope and disappointment, control and collapse. But if you stand firm, something deeper happens. Your silence stops being an act and becomes authority. Your lack of reaction becomes the loudest statement of all. And slowly, her tests will escalate. More messages, more obvious attempts, more elaborate ways to get your attention. Because uncertainty is unbearable for the ego. This is the silent shift most men never reach. When your stillness holds, her curiosity turns into confusion. Confusion turns into frustration. Frustration morphs into obsession. And all the while you're not chasing, not explaining, not trying to prove anything. You're simply existing beyond her reach, and that's where true power lives. 6. Integration. Silence as your new baseline. The most powerful silence isn't the one you choose, it's the one that becomes second nature. Most men never reach this stage because, even when they're not speaking, they're still waiting. They check their phones. They wonder if she's watching. They replay scenarios in their minds, hoping she'll finally realize what she's lost. That's not real silence. That's absence fueled by attachment. And as long as attachment drives you, she'll feel no urgency to come back. But something extraordinary happens when silence becomes part of who you are. You stop asking, will she notice? And start living as if it doesn't matter whether she does. Your energy no longer orbits around her reaction. It flows inward and upward. You begin building habits, chasing goals, creating momentum in your own life. And with every new layer of growth, you shift further and further out of her gravitational pull. This is the point that terrifies the ego, because when you stop revolving around her, the dynamic reverses. She starts revolving around you. Nothing pierces deeper than the realization that the man she once controlled is now beyond her reach. The silence that once felt like a tactic now radiates as presence. The distance that once seemed like punishment becomes proof of evolution. And that evolution is louder, more magnetic, and more irresistible than any message you could send. When you reach this stage, silence is no longer about withholding contact. It's about embodying self-mastery. It's not absence, it's authority. And authority doesn't chase, doesn't wait, doesn't seek validation. It simply is. And when you live in that state, expanding, evolving, untethered, the game changes forever. Because silence has stopped being a choice. It's become the baseline of who you are. And that's when she finally feels the weight of what she's lost. 7. When silence becomes psychological pressure. Silence doesn't crush them all at once. It's not a dramatic explosion that leaves them gasping for air. It's something far more subtle, far more dangerous. It seeps in slowly, quietly dismantling their sense of certainty from the inside out. At first, they brush it off. They tell themselves they don't care, that your absence doesn't matter. They post pictures, distract themselves, fill their days with noise, and for a while, it works. But silence has a way of lingering, like a shadow that refuses to leave, and eventually, it begins to whisper questions they can't silence. That's how it always starts, with curiosity. I wonder what they're doing. Then curiosity turns into checking. Let me just look once. Checking becomes habit. Why haven't they posted? Why aren't they watching my stories? And habit soon crosses into obsession. Why does this feel different? Did I lose control? This is the hidden power of silence. Not in the immediate reaction, but in the slow erosion of their ego's confidence. Every unanswered question eats away at the certainty they once had about you, about themselves, about the dynamic they believed they controlled. The absence they dismissed as irrelevant becomes a puzzle they can't solve, and egos hate puzzles they can't solve. They replay old conversations searching for hidden meaning. They rethink decisions they once made with arrogance. They wonder if you've moved on, if someone else is now where they used to stand. They start checking spaces they swore they didn't care about. The silence that once felt empty now feels heavy because it no longer represents distance. It represents the unknown, and the unknown terrifies them. Because as long as they could predict you, they felt safe. They knew you'd react. They knew you'd reach out eventually. They knew deep down that the story wasn't over. But when you become unreadable, when your silence is no longer predictable, their sense of control collapses. Suddenly, every scenario their mind builds leads nowhere. Every attempt to rationalize your absence falls apart. The story they once wrote in their head has no ending anymore, and that lack of closure drives the ego insane. This is where psychological pressure truly begins. It's not loud, it doesn't shout, it doesn't demand attention. It whispers, and whispers are far harder to ignore. At first, it's just a passing thought before bed. Then it's the first thing they think about in the morning. Soon, it's creeping into every empty moment, every pause in conversation, every scroll through their phone, every night when the world goes quiet. They're no longer reacting to you directly. They're reacting to the silence itself. And the deeper that silence goes, the more their own mind becomes the enemy. They start projecting meaning onto your absence. They invent stories to explain it. They spiral through what-ifs and maybe-thens. They imagine you happy, healed, thriving, and that image hits harder than any message you could have sent. The less they can map you, the more their mind turns against itself, building narratives that hurt more than the truth ever could. 8. The real power, who you become in the silence. Silence was never meant to be a tactic to change them. It was always meant to change you. Most men miss this truth. They go silent, withdraw, and wait, obsessively checking their phones, hoping for a reaction. They see silence as a strategy to make her feel something, to make her regret, to make her come back. But that's not what real silence is. Real silence isn't a waiting room where you sit and hope the other person finally sees your worth. It's a training ground where you become worthy in a way that no one can ignore. This is the shift most never make. Because if silence is just about absence, nothing changes. You'll still be the same man, just quieter. The same insecurities, the same dependency, the same craving for validation will remain, and she'll still feel the same power she always did. But if silence becomes a space for transformation, if it becomes the forge where you build discipline, sharpen your purpose, and reclaim your self-respect, then it stops being a pause and starts becoming a weapon. It's no longer about whether she misses you, it's about whether you evolve beyond the version of yourself that ever needed her validation in the first place. Think about it. The man she knew may have begged for attention, argued to be understood, and sought closure to feel complete. That man was predictable, easy to manipulate, easy to dismiss. But when that man no longer exists, when he's replaced by someone who walks in purpose, who no longer chases, who no longer reacts, that absence cuts deeper than any message you could ever send. It's not just that you're gone, it's that you're no longer available in the form she once controlled. Silence, when done right, reveals power that was always there, but never claimed. It's the power of self-respect, the quiet authority of someone who no longer needs to be chosen to know their value. It's the strength of a man who no longer waits to be seen because he's too focused on becoming. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. It happens in the unseen moments, when you choose to work out instead of scrolling through her profile, when you build new habits instead of checking old messages, when you invest in your future instead of replaying the past. Every time you redirect that energy, you're rewriting the story. And not just for her, but for yourself. And here's the paradox. The more you evolve, the less you care whether she notices. At first, you might hope she sees your progress. But soon, the focus shifts entirely. You start realizing that the real reward isn't her attention. It's your growth. The discipline you build becomes its own validation. The clarity you gain becomes its own peace. And the life you're creating becomes too fulfilling to be paused for someone who couldn't see your worth before. This is the part they never expect. They expect silence to be a tactic, a waiting period before you reach out again. They assume that eventually you'll cave, that your pride will crumble, that the silence will end. But when it doesn't, when the man who once waited simply moves on, the ground beneath them shifts. Suddenly, they're not dealing with the same version of you anymore. The leverage they once had disappears, and with it, their ability to manipulate the dynamic. This is where the deepest regret begins to take root. Because people don't regret losing the person who waited. They regret losing the person who outgrew them. They regret realizing too late that they were dealing with a man who no longer needs their validation, their apology, or their presence. And nothing haunts the ego more than the realization that the control it once had has vanished. Not because of revenge, not because of games, but because the target of its control no longer exists. That's the real power of silence. It's not about creating distance to make someone miss you. It's about creating distance to become someone they can never reach again. It's about showing, not through words, but through your evolution, that their opinion is irrelevant to your growth. And when that happens, something profound occurs. Power stops being something you chase. It becomes something you embody. The man who once sought validation becomes the man who validates himself. The man who once needed closure becomes the man who is the closure. The man who once feared being forgotten becomes the man whose absence lingers louder than any presence ever could. And the woman who once believed she could always get you back now faces a reality she never prepared for. The version of you she knew is gone, and she can't manipulate what no longer exists. This is the final evolution silence offers, not a tactic, not a game, but a transformation so complete that the old dynamic can never return. And in that transformation lies the ultimate truth. The power was never in making her change. It was in becoming the man who no longer needs her to. And once you reach that place, silence stops being about her entirely. It becomes the language of your strength, the proof of your growth, and the foundation of a life built on your terms. And that, brother, is the kind of silence that doesn't just change the relationship, it changes you. And when you change, everything else will follow. 9. The final outcome. Silence as a way of life. Disappearing was never the ending, it was always the opening move. The silence you once saw as the finish line is actually the beginning of the real game, a deeper transformation that has nothing to do with them and everything to do with you. Because when you master silence, it stops being a tactic to win someone back. It becomes a language you speak, a posture you live in, a way of existing that no one else can disrupt. And in that stillness, everything changes, the power, the control, the entire dynamic flips. Most men think the goal is for her to come back. They fantasize about the message, the apology, the knock on the door. But when silence becomes your way of life, the outcome no longer defines the victory. If she returns, it's no longer on her terms, it's on yours, and those terms are no longer negotiable. And if she never returns, it doesn't matter. Because the silence wasn't about punishing her or proving a point. It was about reclaiming control of your inner world, the one place her actions never truly had power over unless you allowed them to. This is the profound shift most never reach. They spend their silence waiting, waiting for the text, waiting for the regret, waiting for the chase. But when you stop waiting, when your silence evolves from a tactic into a state of being, you realize the truth. They are no longer the point. Their reaction, their choices, their validation, none of it carries the weight it once did. Your world continues to expand regardless of what they do. And that realization is the foundation of unshakable peace. They might try harder now. They might post more, flaunt more, talk louder. They might even attempt to recreate the old emotional hooks that once kept you in orbit. But none of it lands the same way anymore. Because the foundation has shifted, You are no longer standing at the door waiting to be let back in. You're not refreshing the screen for a message. You're not rearranging your life around their attention. You're not even playing the game. And that's what makes you so dangerous now. Suddenly, they're the ones circling the void you left behind. They're the ones asking questions in the silence they once dismissed. Why doesn't he care anymore? Why does this feel different? Did I misjudge my value? And as those questions grow louder, they begin to rewrite their story. Not around the version of you they once knew, but around the absence they now feel. Your silence becomes the center of their narrative, the gravitational pull they can't escape, the question that lingers long after the noise fades. This is the highest form of Stoic mastery, not needing to win the game because you've outgrown it entirely. It's not about revenge. It's not about getting them back. It's about building a life so full, so grounded, so rich in purpose, that their presence or absence no longer defines its meaning. They're free to come or go, and either way, your peace remains untouched. They can try to provoke a reaction, but there's nothing left to pull on. They can attempt to regain control, but there's no lever to move. You have removed every emotional hook they once relied on, and in doing so, you've reclaimed your sovereignty. At this stage, silence stops being a move on the chessboard and becomes the entire game itself. It's no longer about withholding contact. It's about mastering your response to the world. It's about understanding that true power isn't in how loudly you speak, but in how calmly you stand. It's about embodying the principle that your worth isn't determined by who stays or who leaves. It's inherent, untouchable, and absolute. And this is the beautiful paradox. The less you need them, the more they feel your absence. The more indifferent you become, the more obsessed they grow. The quieter you are, the louder the silence becomes in their mind. Because power isn't about control over them, it's about control over yourself. And when you have that, when your peace is rooted so deeply within you that no one else can touch it, that's when the world bends around your gravity. Brother, silence was never about changing her. It was always about transforming you. At first you think pulling back will make her chase. But real strength isn't found in waiting for a reaction. It's found in no longer needing one. When silence stops being a tactic and becomes your nature, everything shifts. You stop orbiting her world and start building your own. This journey isn't about revenge or manipulation. It's about reclaiming control over your peace, your focus, and your worth. The moment you stop seeking validation, her power over you ends. Tests lose their weight. Pressure builds on her side, and the story flips. Not because you forced it, but because you evolved beyond it. The lesson is simple. Power isn't in making her miss you. It's in becoming the man who doesn't need to be missed. When silence becomes your baseline, calm, grounded, unshakable, her reaction no longer matters. And that's when the story stops revolving around her and starts being written by you. Brother, remember this. Silence is not about absence. It's about authority. It's not about punishing someone else. It's about mastering yourself. The moment you stop chasing, stop explaining, and stop waiting for their validation, you reclaim the most powerful thing a man can ever own, his peace. That's the version of you they never saw coming, the version they can't control, and the version they will never forget. If this message spoke to something deep inside you, don't let it fade the moment the video ends. Hit that subscribe button and join us here at Stoic Station, where every lesson is designed to sharpen your strength, deepen your clarity, and help you rise above the noise. And before you go, leave a comment with these words: "My silence is my strength." Say it not just as a sentence, but as a declaration, a promise to yourself that from this moment on, you choose discipline over desperation, growth over games, and peace over permission. This is where your transformation begins.